Kept you waiting, haven't I? So there's a bit to talk about that, but let's save that for when I get my community tab back. Anyway, this is your strategy guide show, and I am back because an upcoming release has piqued my interest, and the very kind people at PQube reached out about it and said, hey, want to check it out? So a big shout out to PQube for the review code. This video we are going to break down the tactics, AI, and cheese for the Dragoness Command of the Flame. Dragoness Command of the Flame is a Heroes of Might and Magic-esque game developed by Crazy Goat Games, known for not all that much on the Switch and not even really too much on Steam, so welcome to the Thunderdome. The story centers around a young elven commander under the employ of the Dragoness, the queen of the regal dragons whose land was shattered by the flames of a civil war with the Shaival, a race of dragons defiled by dark magic. You, as the commander, will go out and act as the Hand of the Dragoness, gathering resources and relics, recruiting powerful beasts, and reclaiming the lands as they once were, all the while helping to build a new capital city of which to exercise your power. Now, there is one caveat to this, and I hate spoilers, but, there's an unfortunate circumstance at the end of the tutorial mission, which leads to a small gameplay mechanic later on, but yeah, I'll get to that when we get to that. Overall, on a serious note, the story is pretty straightforward and keeps to the point, something I can appreciate as time is quite scarce these days. I found the overall writing, though, to be a bit on the simpler side, with somewhat believable developments, but honestly, it's a serviceable story, not bad at all. Visually, the game does, however, have me kind of split in half. On one hand, the old school Neverwinter Nights D&D classic 2000s game aesthetic is solid. It really felt like I was living that, reviving that old school PC games magic, which, being a Heroes of Might and Magic inspired game, definitely a solid point for me. I fully got that from sort of the lower res visuals, and for me, I love it, but I get it. For more hardcore tech fans who are interested in better graphics, especially with the whole Baldur's Gate thing happening, I get it. May not like it too much, but honestly, for an indie dev and one that's looking for the old school feel, I do dig it. With that said, though, I do feel that the static portraits used during the conversation scenes are quite a bit bland, especially if I compare it to something like Stone's Keeper, which I had done before, where the visuals had a very distinct feeling. Honestly, the renders of the characters and creatures during the dialogue just look so generic, and honestly, some of the key players early on are just known with names like Wizard. So, not really the most creative in my opinion, but again, that old school general aesthetic is pretty solid. Speaking of the dialogue though, I do want to say audio-wise, I was extremely surprised. The whole game is actually voiced dialogue for every cutscene. So yeah, rock on with that. Sound effects and music also fit that 2000s era vibes of Heroes of Might and Magic, so I can't complain all that much. I will say, however, that while the game does have a substantial voiceover, the quality isn't really fully up to par, with many sounding kind of straightforward, especially to with your bestest friend companion, whose every line just seems to sound like it lacks any emotional tone. But again, I do hear that VO work is quite hard, and seldom do the talent actually have access or context for the lines that they're reading. So I'm not gonna bash it too much. Just know, lots of VO, probably not the best quality. Performance-wise, with the low-res approach, there really aren't any shakeups or problems when moving through the game. My only complaint is that the map controls are a bit sluggish, as the cursor that you use to point is mapped to the left stick, and it doesn't automatically move the camera, and it doesn't go through any terrain. So you actually have to play with both sticks, with the left mapping your cursor and the right mapping your camera, and then you have to sort of adjust through the environment because you can't jump over walls with your cursor. Now this only applies to the level maps, which we'll get into in a moment, and not with the battles, but it's just kind of a little bit strange. In general, again, it runs super well, but it might take you a little bit to just get used to that weird control scheme. In all, for an indie game that takes heavily from the old school Heroes and D&D games, it's a nice charm that offers a fair amount of solid gameplay, and for fans of that older 2000s aesthetic, it's an experience you'll quickly get on board with. For newcomers who are interested in checking those sort of games out, I would say keep watching and see how you like what's coming up next. As usual, there's a bit to unpack here, so let's try to keep this brisk. The game itself has 3 distinct gameplay elements: the level map, the technical grid-based battles, and the base building resource collector. Starting with the level map, if you're familiar with the old school D&D Heroes of Might and Magic games, then you should be good, but essentially you control the commander as you move her across a board interacting with various elements, such as treasure chests, resources, and buildings. Most of these elements are pretty self-explanatory. Resources can be gathered and used for base upgrades and getting new units. Chests grant items and experience, and so on and so on. Commander herself does have a set amount of movement per turn, and at the end of your turn, based upon whatever upgrades you have for your commander and your commander's archetype, you can receive a bonus for your following turn, which can be something like extra movement, buffs for battle, or extra resources. Speaking of the commander herself, through gaining experience, she can level up, gaining access to new abilities and spells that can be used in battle to buff your monsters and provide extra benefits. Items can also be found through exploration that can be equipped to the commander up to a maximum of 3, providing even further bonuses for your monsters. So leveling up is super important, and making sure you have good items on is just as important. Now, the goal for these level maps is to complete various objective quests and to progress further in the story. Objectives are fairly straightforward, such as the usual kill these dudes or recover these places, etc., etc. Also, each zone has 3 extra objectives, which if completed will provide you extra resources for use in upgrades. In general, you can take as much time as you want to progress through the map, gathering everything, but do note that you have a food resource for your army that lowers by 1 every turn. Should this reach 0 and you are unable to feed your army, then all units get debuffed. And the longer that you spend not feeding them, the worse that debuff gets. So always keep your eyes on that food. Speaking of your army, let's talk about them and those grid-based battles. Battles play out on a huge grid with square spaces that units move through. You can fill up to 6 units at a time, and I must say that the range of units you can field is quite diverse. In fact, there are over 40 different units you can recruit, all with their own uses and skills, which allow for an impressive amount of flexibility when going through battles. Furthermore, units do have a rank level system from 0 to 2 stars. You're given the choice to merge units of the same rank together to move on to the next rank. This provides enhanced stats for that unit, and it frees up a slot for more units to be recruited to your team. On the topic of stats, the game doesn't really get into it, but all units have 3 main stats: health, shields, and attack. Attacks can also be classified into ranged, melee, or magic. There are also hit, evasion, and some defensive stats, but they are mostly tied to items and the commander's abilities, and aren't really explained in detail at all, but you can kind of get the image: hit is hit, evasion's evasion, so forth. Now, if you were listening just 1 second ago, you may have heard me say that shields are a stat. Yes, this is one of those games where you need to drop all the shields before you can actually inflict damage on an enemy. This also applies to your units as well, and it's very important to note that any damage that you received during the battle will persist and carry over through the next battle and the next moves you make on the board. Life can be recovered through the use of interactive elements on the board and the commander's restoration spells. Shields will automatically recover at the start and end of every battle. In regards to spells, potions, and skills, all units in the game have a certain amount of mana that allows for them to cast their spells as needed. You can select spells and skills from the options on the left side during battle. In general, these are extremely powerful and really help getting things on track in case of a slip-up. Finally, there's that base building aspect I mentioned way at the start of this section. Basically, you can use extra resources gained from the map levels to construct and level up buildings in your city to unlock new units, skills, and items for use in quests. So definitely super helpful. In all, the systems, while plentiful, are fairly simple and extremely easy to pick up on for veterans and newcomers alike. However, I will say that the tutorials aren't 100% newcomer friendly. With some aspects of the game, you just kind of learn through trial and error. If you're down for this sort of hybrid system of level navigation, grid-based battles, then it's a pretty solid title. As usual, it was normal mode for me, and honestly, I didn't really find anything extremely challenging. Most battles boil down to who has the bigger numbers on the monsters and who can field more of those monsters. This can be mitigated through good skill usage via the commander and some of special monsters with unique abilities, but in general, you'll basically enter into a map, fight the easy battles first, level up, get those bonuses and spells and abilities, and more units to join you, and then crush those higher level battles. As for AI behavior, I would say that it makes fairly simple plays. Ranged units almost never move and always snipe from the most furthest backline possible. Melees always rush, and skill usage varies from okay at best to ineffective at worst. A good example is with the Ents and their Vine skill that lowers movement. Optimally, this would be used just before my turn to keep my units from getting the jump on them, so then the enemy can initiate combat on me first during their next turn. In most cases, the AI just kind of used the skill whenever, and it was incredibly inopportune and it just made the battles last longer for me. So it didn't really feel like I had to really plan around it. Now, I will say that I did remiss one thing from the previous section, and that is, at its heart, Dragoness is actually a roguelike, kinda. If you happen to lose a battle and you have the option then to load a save or return to town. Choosing to return to town allows you to get a new archetype for the commander, which changes up her starting stats and skills for the next attempt. Plus, any base upgrades carry over, so when you unlock units, you're always going to be set for life. Overall, while the battle systems are fun, the AI challenge isn't all that evident, and I didn't really find myself needing to use complex strategies to navigate the fights. For veterans, I could see breezing right through this and maybe having some fun time experimenting. Newcomers will more than likely be able to progress through these systems quickly, as long as they know how to pick their fights. Ranged. The game knows that ranged units are broken, and it always tries to make you not use them through having bonus objectives that say, don't use ranged units. Honestly speaking, there is no limit to how far a ranged unit can shoot in Dragoness, so you can literally hit from one corner to another corner, with the only exception being if a melee unit kind of blocks your path, but then you can just slightly move past them and then keep shooting. So I would highly suggest, if anything's giving you trouble, get a bunch of ranged units, fire volleys away, and just go ham. On the topic of merging, I would say don't merge too early. Wait until you have about 3 of the same type or same level before you consider jumping up to the next one. As I mentioned before, numbers play a massive role in this game, and the more units you field, the more power you effectively have. You need to be considering your turn amount over the strength of the monsters, so do keep that in mind. As for the commander, XP is extremely cool, and you want to always prioritize getting XP. So if you open a treasure chest and you can choose between some resources or XP, choose the XP. Why? Every time the commander levels up, she gets access to new abilities, which can increase maximum shields, maximum life, or provide bonuses for your monsters, which is critical to complete the battles. Finally, in terms of magics, which is an important part, you probably want to focus mostly on healing magic so that way you can keep your damage units around longer. Resources can be kind of a little bit challenging to get, and sometimes to buy a new unit does cost a little bit too much money. So I would say focus on healing, keep your team alive as long as you possibly can. Overall, Dragoness, the Command of the Flame, exceeded my expectations, and it was an overall enjoyable experience. While not having the most comprehensive story, it does deliver with that fun, old-school experience that old guys like myself really enjoy. This is especially the case if you're a fan of Heroes of Might and Magic or the old-school Neverwinter Nights, Baldur's Gate, classic D&D RPGs. If you're familiar with them, the gameplay is super intuitive for veterans and fairly enjoyable. For newcomers, I do admit that the tutorials, while not super amazing, will set you up with the basics. However, you will have a few trial by fires to figure out some of the more deeper interworkings of the game. Honestly speaking though, in general, I think it's overall fairly friendly compared to some of the other games that I've reviewed on the channel. So if you're interested in this title and you feel like paying the amount for it, it's definitely worth a pickup if you're willing to check it out. Anyway, if you watched this far, thank you so much for sticking around. It's going to take me a little bit to maybe get parts of my channel back online because unfortunately YouTube said I was being a bad boy. But yeah, more updates to come, more videos to come hopefully, and as always, if you want to support the channel, you know what to do. This is Show, and I will catch you in the next video. Cheers!